In the golden kingdom of Osoro, music was not just art, it was life itself. Every person was born with a song in their chest, a rhythm that pulsed in time with the world's heartbeat. The rivers hummed, the wind sighed in harmony, and even silence had melody. They said the gods gave this gift so no one would ever feel alone, for as long as a heart beat, the world would sing with them. Among the people lived Leone, a 22-year-old healer whose heart song could calm storms and mend broken bodies. Her melody was unlike any other, pure, steady, luminous. When she sang, crops turned green again, soldiers laid down their weapons and children slept without pain. To the humble she was a blessing. But to those who ruled she was a threat. The royal priests of Osoro, wrapped in robes of ivory and gold, whispered among themselves that no mortal should command such harmony. They said her heart song was too loud, too strong, that it challenged the voices of the gods. At first they watched her from afar, testing her power with false prayers and impossible wounds. Each time she healed what they brought, not for pride but for mercy. Yet mercy is a dangerous thing in kingdoms that thrive on fear. When war began to loom against the western tribes, the priests demanded that Leone lend her song to the army, to use her gift to shatter enemy hearts before they ever reached the gates. But Leone refused. The heart was not made to destroy, she told them, and a song meant for healing should never echo in war. Her defiance rippled through the court like discord. The priests called it blasphemy, saying she denied divine will. They told the king that her song had grown too strong, that her melody would soon drown out his crown. The king, bound by fear and prophecy, listened. On the night of the eclipse, he summoned her to the temple of echoing marble, where 1,000 candles burned without sound. The people watched from afar, weeping in silence, for they knew that once a melody was silenced, the world dimmed a little more. The priests chanted around her, voices rising like thunder. They held a blade carved from starstone, said to cut not flesh but essence. Leone stood still, her eyes steady, her lips whispering a lullaby even as they tore open the air around her. "You cannot silence what was born of the world," she murmured, but her voice faltered when they reached inside her chest and drew out her heart. It shone like molten gold, still beating, still singing. The sound was both sorrow and beauty, a song so pure that even the priests trembled. Yet they sealed it within a crystal vessel, locking it in sacred glass until the light dimmed to a faint glow. When her body fell to the temple floor, the kingdom's music faltered. Rivers stilled, birds stopped singing, even the wind forgot its tune. The priests declared that the gods had accepted the sacrifice. The king announced that peace would return. But beneath the marble floor where her blood had touched, a quiet hum began, faint, fragile, defiant. Leone's song had not ended. It lingered like dawn beneath the horizon, waiting for the moment the world would remember what it had lost. Leone awoke in darkness, not the kind that came from closing one's eyes, but a deeper void that pressed against her like water. Her body was cold, her breath shallow, her chest silent. She reached trembling fingers toward her ribs and found the scar, a thin line, smooth and cruel, where her heart had once been. There was no pulse beneath it, no warmth, no rhythm. The silence inside her was unbearable. She should have been dead, and yet she wasn't. She could move, breathe, see and think, but she could not feel. Not sorrow, not joy, not even pain. She was a hollow girl wandering in the echo of what she once was. When the temple guards dragged her lifeless form to the edge of the kingdom and left her among the dunes, they thought they had cast away a corpse. But as night fell and the stars spread like scattered embers across the sky, something stirred inside her, a faint vibration like a memory of music. She rose, weak and unsteady, and took her first steps away from Osoro. Behind her, the golden towers gleamed beneath the moon, silent as tombs. Ahead stretched the wastelands, an endless expanse of cracked stone and whispering wind. Days blurred into one another. She did not hunger or thirst as before. Her body seemed to exist between life and death. Animals sensed her emptiness and fled when she drew near. Villagers who caught sight of her face crossed themselves and muttered prayers. "The heartless one walks again," they whispered. Her eyes reflected no light, her voice carried no tone. Even the earth beneath her feet seemed to sigh in discomfort. She was alive, but the world no longer knew how to hold her. And yet each night as she drifted into uneasy sleep, she heard it, a sound faint as breath, fragile as hope. A heartbeat. Not within her, but far away, pulsing through the air like a distant drum. Sometimes it called her name, Leone. Leone, soft as wind across sand. She followed it, step by step, through the desolation. The call led her to forgotten ruins where music once lived, to shattered harps and broken bells half buried in the dust. In each she felt a flicker of recognition, as though her lost song had touched them once. One night, as she lay beneath a sky bruised with twilight, a dream came. A woman appeared, not of flesh but of light and rhythm. Her body shimmered with constellations, her eyes were galaxies that never closed. When she spoke, her voice sounded like chords strummed by the cosmos itself. "The heart is not a thing," the woman said. "It is a rhythm. A promise between the soul and the world. They took your vessel, not your song. Find it again and you will remember who you are." Leone reached out, but the woman dissolved into threads of starlight that sank into her skin. For the first time since her death she felt warmth, faint, fleeting but real. When she awoke, dawn had begun to rise, painting the horizon in fire. Her chest remained hollow, but the silence inside it had changed. It no longer felt like an absence but a question waiting for an answer. The faint heartbeat she heard in her dreams now pulsed faintly through the wind, leading east toward jagged peaks that shimmered in the distance. The Mountains of Echo. They were said to be the cradle of the gods, the place where the first songs were sung, and where the gods forged hearts from melody and breath. No mortal dared to climb them, for the echoes there were said to reveal one's true self. Leone wrapped her cloak tighter and began her journey toward those mountains. Her steps were slow, her shadow long. The world behind her belonged to silence, but ahead, somewhere between the mountains and the stars, her heart was still singing. The mountains greeted her not with welcome, but with silence so vast it felt alive. The air thinned as Leone climbed higher, her bare feet tracing narrow paths carved by ancient wind. Snow glittered like shattered glass beneath the rising moon. She had not spoken in weeks, yet the echoes of her steps seemed to whisper her name back to her, as if the mountain itself remembered her coming. At dusk, she found a cave lined with smooth stones that pulsed faintly with sound. There, sitting before a dying fire, was an old man draped in tattered robes. His hair was white as frost, his eyes clouded by blindness, but his posture was straight, almost regal. He turned his head toward her before she made a sound. "You walk like one without a heartbeat," he said. His voice was rough and low, like gravel shifting in the wind. "The mountains told me you would come." Leone froze. "Who are you?" "Once I was called Kanu," he replied. "Keeper of the echoes. In the age before kings, it was my duty to guard the hearts that sang too brightly, to keep their music from burning the world." He chuckled softly. "But I grew old and the world forgot the old songs. Until now." Something inside her stirred. "They took my heart," she said quietly. "They sealed it in crystal. I can still hear it calling me." Kanu nodded slowly as though he had expected her words. "The heart is never gone, child. It hides in the rhythm of the world. But you've forgotten how to listen." He lifted a hand, trembling but precise, and gestured for her to sit beside him. "Close your eyes. Breathe. Let the silence speak first." She obeyed. For a long while, there was nothing but the faint hiss of wind outside the cave. Then beneath that, something else. A vibration soft as the memory of a lullaby, threading through her bones. It wasn't a sound she heard but a feeling she remembered, the steady pulse of life, buried deep under stone and grief. "That is the first echo," Kanu said. "The sound of your bones remembering who they are." He taught her to listen not with her ears but with the weight of her body. To sit still enough that she could feel the heartbeat of the ground beneath her, the rhythm in the fall of snowflakes, the quiet percussion in her breath. "Every living thing hums," he told her. "Even stone. Even sorrow." Days passed, or perhaps weeks, time blurred in the high silence. Leone sat at dawn with her palms pressed to the earth, feeling faint tremors move through the soil. She began to hum, uncertainly at first, her voice low and cracked. But each time she did, the air responded, not with words but with resonance. The wind seemed to bend around her sound, repeating it softly, shaping it. It was as if the world itself remembered her song and wanted to sing it back. Yet when she slept, her dreams brought shadows. She saw the priests in their golden masks standing before her captured heart, now glowing inside its crystal cage. They had placed it at the center of the king's new war machine, an army of metal giants, powered by the rhythm she once carried within her chest. With every beat, her stolen heart sent light coursing through their veins of steel, fueling destruction across the lands. She woke from those dreams with her hands clenched and her throat burning. At first, she tried to bury the anger, to let the mountain's calm dissolve it, but the feeling grew louder each night. It wasn't just grief now, it was rhythm. A steady, furious drumbeat rising in her hollow chest. One evening, as Kanu meditated by the fire, she spoke through clenched teeth. They use it to kill. My heart, it feeds their wars. Kanu's blind eyes lifted toward her voice. Then you must decide what song your heart will play when you find it again, he said quietly. Vengeance or mercy, both are music. But one destroys the world and the other remakes it. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, not from storm but from the pulse of something waking in the earth. Leone rose, her shadow stretching long across the stone walls. She no longer needed to hear her heart through dreams. It was beating now, not within her but around her. In the rocks. In the sky. In the blood of her rage. The hollow girl was no longer hollow. She was beginning to hum with power, and the mountains were listening. The night was restless, wrapped in clouds heavy as iron. The mountains trembled under the weight of thunder, and the wind that screamed through the peaks carried the smell of something ancient, the taste of endings and beginnings. Leone sat by the dying fire in Kanu's cave, her eyes fixed on the sky outside, where lightning stitched white veins across the heavens. The air pulsed with energy she could feel deep in her hollow chest. For nights she had been hearing the distant echo of her heart again, not a song of sorrow but a battle drum calling her home. Far away in the golden kingdom of Osoro, the priests gathered in the crystal hall. The great chamber glowed with the trapped light of her heart, now encased within its fractured vessel. They chanted the old rhythms, their hands striking the sacred drums that had once been instruments of worship but were now weapons of destruction. Every beat of their hands summoned storms, cracked mountains, and drew lightning from the sky. They believed they were controlling the gods, but they were only awakening something that could never be bound. When the first bolt struck, the sound was not of thunder, but of 1,000 hearts breaking at once. The lightning speared through the temple dome, shattering the crystal prison into a shower of burning shards. For an instant, the kingdom glowed red, illuminated by the raw power of the heart song that could no longer be contained. The drums fell silent, and the priests froze as the air rippled with a sound no human voice could make, a low, rolling note that carried both fury and freedom. At that same moment, high in the mountains, Leone screamed. The sound tore from her throat as though ripped from the earth itself. She fell to her knees, clutching her chest, feeling the impossible, a heartbeat. Slow at first, hesitant like a long-forgotten memory finding its way back. Then stronger, louder, until her ribs vibrated with it. The beat filled her, expanding outward until it was all she could hear, all she could be. Her veins lit up beneath her skin, glowing gold and crimson, pulsing in rhythm with the storm above. The air around her shimmered. Every breath came out as misted light. Her eyes widened, and the hollow in her chest filled with warmth, not the gentle warmth of a healer's touch, but the wild, molten fire of creation itself. She gasped, her hands trembling as sparks leapt from her fingertips. Old Kanu rose unsteadily, sensing the change without needing to see it. The gods never owned your heart, he said, his voice low but steady over the roar of the storm. They only feared its strength. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the cave. In that blinding instant, Leone looked less like a woman and more like the echo of a divine storm given form. The walls shook as her heartbeat aligned with the rhythm of the earth, a perfect, unbroken pulse. The snow outside melted in rings of steam. The fire rose higher without fuel. Leone stood, her bare feet sinking slightly into the trembling ground. The world itself seemed to move with her heartbeat, every pulse echoing across the peaks, shaking loose the snow from cliffs, sending ripples through distant valleys. She raised a hand toward the mouth of the cave. Lightning curved in the sky, and for a moment, the bolts moved in time with her breath. The power was no longer distant, no longer fractured. It had come home. And yet, within that power she felt something greater than fury, an awakening. Her heart's song wasn't a melody of destruction, it was a symphony of truth. It was every heartbeat that had ever been silenced, every spirit that had ever been chained by fear. It was life itself, reborn through her. Kanu bowed his head. The mountains listen, he whispered. Even the gods must now. Leone stepped out into the storm. The rain hissed against her glowing skin but did not touch her. The air around her shimmered with light, her hair whipping in the wind, her veins blazing like molten rivers under her flesh. She looked toward the horizon, where Osoro lay shrouded in thunderclouds and guilt. Their drums stole my rhythm, she murmured, her voice low but resonant, carrying through the storm. Now they will hear the true song. When she took her first step down the mountain, the thunder followed, not in chaos but in harmony, each rumble matching the fierce and perfect cadence of her resurrected heart. The king of Osoro dreamed of cracks in his throne long before they appeared. Each night since the lightning storm that shattered the crystal heart, he had heard a strange rhythm pulsing through his palace walls, faint at first, then louder, until even his wine cups trembled with it. He would wake drenched in sweat, convinced that somewhere beneath the gold floors, the earth itself was beating in defiance. His priests told him it was the echo of divine anger. His generals whispered that Leone, the heartless girl, had risen again. By dawn the royal banners were raised. The king of Osoro, once called the singer of the golden plains, now looked hollow behind his jeweled crown. His eyes were rimmed with sleepless red, and his voice broke as he addressed his army. "Find her before her rhythm reaches the gates," he commanded. "If she walks among us again, the gods themselves will abandon Osoro." The army marched out beneath a sky bruised by dust and lightning. The priests followed in white robes, carrying drums etched with sacred sigils meant to bind sound and spirit. They began to beat them in unison, hoping to drown whatever song was coming from the horizon. But even as they played, a deeper pulse rose beneath their rhythm, distant at first, then unmistakable. A heartbeat, slow, immense, alive. Far across the dunes, Leone walked. The desert stretched endless before her, but each step she took seemed to bend the horizon closer. Her bare feet pressed into the hot sand, and the ground quivered beneath her, sending ripples like circles across water. Her veins still shimmered faintly with light, and her eyes glowed like twin embers reflecting the rising sun. The hollow scar upon her chest had sealed, not with flesh but with radiance, pulsing gently with each beat. Her heart, once stolen, now carried the sound of the world's beginning. With every pulse, the sand stirred, forming patterns like waves. Stones rolled aside as though in greeting. The wind changed its song to match her pace. Even the dead trees, twisted relics of drought, bent slightly as she passed, their branches trembling with a strange, gentle reverence. The army saw her long before she saw them. From a distant dune she appeared like a mirage of light walking through the heat, half spirit, half storm. The priests began their chants, voices rising, their drums thundering to suppress her rhythm. The desert quaked with the clash of sound, sacred drums against the living pulse of the reborn heart. For a moment, it seemed the sky itself held its breath. Then one by one the priests faltered. Their arms grew heavy. Their rhythm broke. The drum's sound splintered under the weight of hers. Her heartbeat grew louder, deeper, a pulse that didn't just echo but commanded. The soldiers clutched their chests as they felt it vibrating through their armor, through their bones. Horses reared, eyes wild. The king's banners ripped in the wind. Leone kept walking. She said nothing, but her silence was louder than any word. The air around her shimmered, and the dunes shifted under her feet, parting as though to clear her path. The golden sun rose higher, catching on the waves of moving sand, until the desert looked like an ocean of light flowing toward the horizon. The king, mounted high above his trembling army, tried to raise his sword. His voice cracked. "Silence her," he shouted. But the priests could no longer hear him. Their chants had dissolved into gasps, their drums splintered under unseen force. Then came the sound, one long rising note that wasn't quite a heartbeat, nor thunder, but something between the two. The desert began to move. Sand rose like a tide, swirling around her without touching her. Every grain danced in rhythm, illuminated by the pulse that throbbed from within her chest. Leone stopped, standing alone before thousands. Her eyes lifted toward the sky. "You took my heart," she said softly, her voice echoing across miles. "But it was never yours to hold." Her words were carried by the wind like a song. Around her, life stirred, lizards crawled from their burrows, hawks took to the air, flowers bloomed where her footsteps had fallen. The rhythm in her chest spread through the desert like a second dawn. Rivers long dried began to murmur beneath the sand. The soldiers fell to their knees, not in worship but in awe. They could not fight something that was no longer human. Leone took another step forward, and the king's horse screamed and reared, throwing him to the ground. He looked up at her, at the light spilling from her veins, the serenity in her gaze, and for the first time he understood. She was not coming to destroy the kingdom. She was coming to awaken it. Behind her, the wind carried her rhythm, whispering through dunes and bones and roots buried deep. The pulse of life had returned to the land, and its song would not be silenced again. She walked on, each heartbeat reshaping the world, and the desert followed her like a living wave. "You said." Osoro was no longer golden. The city that had once shimmered like sunlight on water now lay heavy beneath a gray, humming sky. Clouds pressed low, trembling with the same rhythm that now seemed to pulse through the streets. The people huddled behind their shutters as the sound grew nearer, not thunder but a heartbeat, vast and slow, rolling like waves against the walls of the kingdom. At the city's heart stood the grand temple, its spires once kissed by the heavens, its bells long silenced by fear. The priests gathered inside, their robes torn and faces pale. The great crystal dais, where Lena's heart had once been caged, still glowed faintly from the remnants of stolen power. Gold chains hung from its sides like veins of sunlight, each link engraved with runes of command. The high priest knelt before it, his voice breaking in chant as the others struck their drums in frantic rhythm. "Bind her," he cried. "Bind the rhythm before it devours us all." But the air around them had already begun to tremble. The drums faltered as their hides rippled, reacting to something deeper than their own sound. Then, with the first step Lena took through the temple gates, every flame within the hall bent toward her as though drawn by breath. She walked slowly barefoot, her robes rippling in waves of light. The guards at the door lowered their spears but did not move. Even those who had come to kill her could not raise their hands. She was not merely alive, she was luminous, the glow of her veins pulsing in time with the air itself. The priests tried to speak, but their words died on their tongues. They had once stolen her heart with ritual and chains of gold. Now those same chains trembled as if remembering her touch. The high priest lifted his staff, voice shaking. "Daughter of rhythm, by decree of the gods." Lena raised her hand. "The gods?" she said softly. "The ones who lent you my song so you could twist it into thunder?" Her voice echoed, not loud but deep, resonant enough to make the walls vibrate. The gold chains writhed, the symbols upon them flickering. The priests began their chant again, desperate, their drums pounding in unison to suppress her presence. But Lena closed her eyes and drew in a single breath, deep, aching, infinite, and began to hum. It was not the sound of anger but of mourning. A low, sorrowful tone that seemed to rise from the floor, from the stone itself. It trembled through the marble and into the pillars, sliding along the walls like water. The temple shuddered. Cracks snaked upward, splitting the carved depictions of gods who had never listened. The priests' voices wavered. Their drums shook, vibrating too fast to control. One by one, the taut skins burst open with thunderous cracks, their rhythm collapsing beneath hers. The sound was unbearable, a symphony of breaking, stone, metal, and lies. Golden statues crumbled from their pedestals, eyes falling like tears of metal. The great stained windows shivered and shattered, scattering colored light across the floor. Lena's hum deepened, and the air itself grew thick with resonance. Every heartbeat, every breath in the temple matching hers whether they wished it or not. The high priest fell to his knees, clutching his chest. "Please, stop," he gasped. The king ordered. "I know," she said, her voice calm, almost tender. "And yet you followed." The king stumbled down the temple steps, his crown tilted, his robe trailing dust. He had come not as ruler, but as a man cornered by the weight of his own deeds. "Mercy," he whispered. "I did not understand what I took." Lena turned to him. Her eyes burned with something beyond rage, compassion sharpened by pain. "You took what you could not understand," she said. "Now feel what you silenced." She placed her hand over her chest. The glow within her veins flared bright enough to blind. Her pulse struck once, and the sound rolled outward like a wave of fireless lightning. The temple screamed. Pillars burst open, spilling dust and gold. The roof split in two and sunlight, fierce and pure, poured through the cracks. The priests were thrown to the ground, their chants silenced, their golden chains turned to ash. The king shielded his eyes, trembling as the light surrounded him. When he looked again, Lena stood amid ruin, calm, radiant, her hair lifted by invisible wind. The heartbeat still thundered, steady and eternal, shaking the last stones loose until the temple, the monument to false divinity, split cleanly down the center. Outside, the people of Osoro fell silent. The pulse had stopped. The air was still. Then came the sound of breath, the first true breath the city had taken in years. Flowers bloomed through the cracks in the streets. Birds cried from the towers. Lena looked down at the king, who knelt among the rubble, weeping without shame. "You built your kingdom on stolen songs," she said softly. "Now let it learn to listen." And with that, she turned from the wreckage. The light around her dimmed, softening into warmth. The temple behind her continued to crumble, its stones falling in slow rhythm, as though bowing to the heartbeat that had reclaimed its power. The silence that followed the temple's fall was immense, a silence so deep it seemed to breathe. Dust drifted through shafts of sunlight, turning the air golden. All around, the ruins of Osoro lay still, its people frozen where they stood, hands pressed to their chests as if to make sure the sound they were hearing was real. It was a heartbeat, slow, vast, and alive, pulsed through the ground beneath their feet. It was not just Lena's anymore. It was theirs. It was the earth's. Every creature, every blade of grass, every droplet of water shivered in time with it. Lena stood at the temple's center, the remnants of its marble walls curving like petals around her. Her chest glowed with a light that was not fire but dawn itself, soft and radiant. She felt her pulse flowing outward, through soil and stone, through air and river, until it reached the farthest edge of the land. For the first time she felt whole not within herself but within everything. The people began to weep. Some out of awe, some from release. For years their songs had been silent, their prayers hollow. Now when they opened their mouths, even in whispers, sound returned, trembling notes that rose and met one another like long-lost kin. Lena sank to her knees among the ruins. The air smelled of rain and broken stone. Her hair, once lit by divine fire, now fell heavy with dust and tears. She pressed her palm to the earth, feeling its slow rhythm answering hers. "Can you hear it?" she whispered, though there was no one near. The heart never stopped. "We just forgot to listen." All around her, tiny movements began, cracks in the ground sealing themselves, flowers pushing up through the rubble. Their petals unfurled in impossible colors, each one beating faintly with light. The wind carried her hum across the valley, and where it touched, wounds closed, rivers cleared, and the trembling of the land eased into calm. The king watched from afar, stripped of his crown, his robe stained with dust. He fell to his knees too, unable to speak. In her song there was no vengeance. There was grief, yes, deep and ancient, but also forgiveness that burned brighter than wrath ever could. It wrapped around the people like warmth after a long storm. As the clouds parted, sunlight poured down, revealing what had once been a temple, now a field of gold and green, wildflowers swaying in rhythm. The air shimmered, filled with the hum of life returning. Lena closed her eyes and for a moment she saw them, the faces of those who had taken her heart, the gods who had watched, the girl she had been. She saw old Kanu, smiling from the mountain's edge. And she smiled too. Her voice rose once more, softer now, almost a lullaby, a song that told the story of breaking and mending, of how the hollow became whole. It drifted into the sky, and with it, the last remnants of her pain dissolved. When the people of Osoro later spoke of that day, they said the world itself had begun to breathe again. Rivers flowed clearer, crops grew faster, and newborns came into the world humming faintly in their sleep. And at the heart of the valley where the temple once stood, there was a single tree with golden leaves. If you pressed your ear to its trunk, you could still hear it, the rhythm of a woman who had forgiven the world and in doing so, had taught it to sing once more. Dawn crept over Osoro with the gentleness of a hand smoothing a scar. The first rays of light slid across the fields, touching new-grown crops, rivers that ran clean again, and roofs rebuilt from the stones of the fallen temple. The air no longer trembled with drums of war or divine command. It hummed with life, quiet and true. The priests who had once ruled through fear now walked among the people as equals. Their golden robes were gone, replaced by simple cloth. They spoke not of gods who demanded sacrifice, but of the rhythm that connected all things, the same rhythm they had tried to silence. Some left the temples altogether, seeking to atone for their past by teaching children to listen, not obey. And the children listened well. In every village they learned to feel their own pulse and to hum their heart songs aloud, turning them into lullabies, work chants and healing melodies. No longer did anyone hide their gifts, no one was burned for their music or silenced for their difference. When storms gathered, they sang together and the skies seemed to pause, as if the world itself had learned respect. Lena, the woman who had once walked hollow through deserts and mountains, was never seen again. Yet her presence was everywhere. Farmers swore their fields swayed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Mothers told their newborns that their first cry was blessed by her breath. Travelers crossing the valley said that, at night, if you pressed your ear to the earth, you could still hear her pulse, a low, steady drum beneath the soil. The storytellers of Osoro began to call her the woman of the second heart. They said her first heart had been human, fragile, breakable, bound by fear, but her second one had been born from pain and forgiveness, and it belonged to all living things. Her legend spread beyond Osoro's borders, carried by wandering bards who sang of how the gods themselves had bowed before a mortal's rhythm. Years passed and the kingdom changed. Stone walls crumbled into gardens, the people no longer built temples for power but circles for music and gathering. Festivals were held every full moon, where drums and flutes joined voices in a song they called the Pulse of Lena. Even the old king's line, now humbled and wise, ruled not by decree but by harmony, their coronations marked not by crowns, but by the unison of thousands of heartbeats. In the quietest hours before dawn, when the mist still clung to the river banks, some swore they could see her, a shimmer of light moving between the trees, her silhouette faint but radiant. Not a ghost, not a goddess, but something simpler and far greater, the sound of life remembering itself. And when the sun rose, the wind carried a faint echo through the valley, the soft, steady rhythm of a heart that refused to die, that beat again and again not for vengeance, but for the endless song of beginnings. When the world grows still, when even the wind forgets to move, there is a sound that never fades. Beneath the dust of fallen temples and the roots of new trees, something continues, a rhythm too soft for thunder, too deep for words. They say if you press your ear to the earth on a quiet night in Osoro, you'll hear it, thum, 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 the echo of a heart that refused to die. It hums through stone and soil, through rivers and breath, through every living creature that remembers how to feel instead of fear. The bards no longer sing of battles or kings, they sing of her. Of Lena, the woman whose heart was stolen, whose song was silenced, yet who found her rhythm again and made the world remember its own. They say the gods listen too. That when storms gather, the thunder rolls in time with her pulse, not in wrath but in reverence. Children born during the dawn light are told her story, how her silence became music, how pain became the seed of new life. They beat their small drums and whisper her name between rhythms. Lena, they say, the heart that would not break. And each time they play, the air vibrates faintly, like the breath of an unseen world answering back. Even the rivers seem to hum now, their currents keeping her time. The forests sway and the wind carries a tone that sounds almost human, not words but meaning, still beating, still here, still whole. And when the drums of the world go silent, when the noise of power and sorrow fades, those who truly listen can hear her. Not loud, not grand, but steady. A heartbeat woven into the fabric of life itself. It is said that her melody begins where all others end. It rises from ruin, threads through grief, and turns silence into song. They took her heart. They silenced her name. But the heart beat again, stronger, freer, infinite. And now, when the last note of every song fades, when the final drum stills, the world listens. Thump, thump. A pulse, faint yet eternal, becoming melody, the music of what survives. Osoro was no longer golden. The city that had once shimmered like sunlight on water now lay heavy beneath a gray, humming sky. Clouds pressed low, trembling with the same rhythm that now seemed to pulse through the streets. The people huddled behind their shutters as the sound grew nearer, not thunder but a heartbeat, vast and slow, rolling like waves against the walls of the kingdom. At the city's heart stood the grand temple, its spires once kissed by the heavens, its bells long silenced by fear. The priests gathered inside, their robes torn and faces pale. The great crystal dais, where Lena's heart had once been caged, still glowed faintly from the remnants of stolen power. Gold chains hung from its sides like veins of sunlight, each link engraved with runes of command. The high priest knelt before it, his voice breaking in chant as the others struck their drums in frantic rhythm. "Bind her," he cried. "Bind the rhythm before it devours us all." But the air around them had already begun to tremble. The drums faltered as their hides rippled, reacting to something deeper than their own sound. Then, with the first step Lena took through the temple gates, every flame within the hall bent toward her as though drawn by breath. She walked slowly, barefoot, her robes rippling in waves of light. The guards at the door lowered their spears but did not move. Even those who had come to kill her could not raise their hands. She was not merely alive, she was luminous, the glow of her veins pulsing in time with the air itself. The priests tried to speak, but their words died on their tongues. They had once stolen her heart with ritual and chains of gold. Now those same chains trembled as if remembering her touch. The high priest lifted his staff, voice shaking. "Daughter of rhythm, by decree of the gods." Lena raised her hand. "The gods?" she said softly. "The ones who lent you my song so you could twist it into thunder?" Her voice echoed, not loud but deep, resonant enough to make the walls vibrate. The gold chains writhed, the symbols upon them flickering. The priests began their chant again, desperate, their drums pounding in unison to suppress her presence. But Lena closed her eyes and drew in a single breath, deep, aching, infinite, and began to hum. It was not the sound of anger but of mourning. A low, sorrowful tone that seemed to rise from the floor, from the stone itself. It trembled through the marble and into the pillars, sliding along the walls like water. The temple shuddered. Cracks snaked upward, splitting the carved depictions of gods who had never listened. The priests' voices wavered. Their drums shook, vibrating too fast to control. One by one, the taut skins burst open with thunderous cracks, their rhythm collapsing beneath hers. The sound was unbearable, a symphony of breaking, stone, metal, and lies. Golden statues crumbled from their pedestals, eyes falling like tears of metal. The great stained windows shivered and shattered, scattering colored light across the floor. Lena's hum deepened, and the air itself grew thick with resonance. Every heartbeat, every breath in the temple matching hers whether they wished it or not. The high priest fell to his knees, clutching his chest. "Please, stop," he gasped. The king ordered. "I know," she said, her voice calm, almost tender. "And yet you followed." The king stumbled down the temple steps, his crown tilted, his robe trailing dust. He had come not as ruler, but as a man cornered by the weight of his own deeds. "Mercy," he whispered. "I did not understand what I took." Lena turned to him. Her eyes burned with something beyond rage, compassion sharpened by pain. "You took what you could not understand," she said. "Now feel what you silenced." She placed her hand over her chest. The glow within her veins flared bright enough to blind. Her pulse struck once, and the sound rolled outward like a wave of fireless lightning. The temple screamed. Pillars burst open, spilling dust and gold. The roof split in two and sunlight, fierce and pure, poured through the cracks. The priests were thrown to the ground, their chants silenced, their golden chains turned to ash. The king shielded his eyes, trembling as the light surrounded him. When he looked again, Lena stood amid ruin, calm, radiant, her hair lifted by invisible wind. The heartbeat still thundered, steady and eternal, shaking the last stones loose until the temple, the monument to false divinity, split cleanly down the center. Outside, the people of Osoro fell silent. The pulse had stopped. The air was still. Then came the sound of breath, the first true breath the city had taken in years. Flowers bloomed through the cracks in the streets. Birds cried from the towers. Lena looked down at the king who knelt among the rubble, weeping without shame. "You built your kingdom on stolen songs," she said softly. "Now let it learn to listen." And with that she turned from the wreckage. The light around her dimmed, softening into warmth. The temple behind her continued to crumble, its stones falling in slow rhythm, as though bowing to the heartbeat that had reclaimed its power.